So I'm having difficulty with this, constructing this custom test. Specifically, I need to look at hip internal and external rotation at 90 degrees of flexion. So I've tried it on multiple different scenarios or options. So you can see here from the video that I took whilst I performed the test is that I have the sensor comparable to that what we saw in the pre-stock tests for the cervical rotation, where I have the sensor on the thigh such that it should be able to capture the rotation of the femur as I go into external rotation here. If you look at the foot, for instance, the foot is sweeping through a much larger arc of motion than just 9 degrees. Yet that is kind of the graph that is shown here. So my suspicion is that the sensor is graphing or capturing a different axis than the one that I'm wanting to capture. I've also tried the same assessment with the sensor on the foot, or excuse me, on the lower shank, so on the shin. And it comes up with also spurious numbers that don't seem to correlate with what anatomically is occurring. I know that in the pre-stock tests, there's also the seated internal and external rotation. However, that does occur in a different plane. Unfortunately, for the specific clinical scenarios that we need, that it actually is a different metric. And I get different values when I have the individual seated versus in the supine position, in part because of the pelvic orientation and also because of the split stance positioning of the legs. For instance, one leg is down, the other leg is flexed here, versus in the seated position with both legs flexed. It changes the innominate orientation and gives me different numbers. As such, I'm curious in trying to be able to work hip internal and external rotation at 90 degrees of flexion into my sequence and workflow. And I'm struggling to do so, obviously. And I was hopeful that you may be able to provide some insight as to suggestions on how I could make a custom test or assessment, and or potentially if you all would be willing to put this into the stock assessments, as it is a very common orthopedic evaluation and is, again, giving us different information than just the seated internal and external rotation. Thanks so much.